to Strategy Execution Unlocked and the fourth episode in our OGs of Strategy Execution series. In this series, we'll meet with the pioneers who have helped shape the strategy execution space. Guests will include industry analysts, authors, founders of management consultancies and software companies, and industry practitioners. Today, I'm excited to welcome Dave Blumhorst to the show. Dave is currently enjoying a well-earned retirement, but over his 40-year career, Dave ran product management, professional services, IT and finance departments for companies ranging from startups through to Fortune 500 firms. Dave, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Ben.
So, David, one of the reasons I wanted you to join the show is that through all the different roles that you've had, you've really truly seen the strategy execution space evolve from a variety of vantage points. You know, you've headed PMOs, you've been a CIO where you've improved the internal capabilities. Now, similar to me, you've worked in a number of software vendor or product companies focused on different aspects of strategy execution, running their professional services, even being one of their leading their product management function. So probably the best place to start is, why don't you provide an overview of your career and maybe how you've seen strategy execution evolve at different stages?
Sure. And you're right. I've been at this, in the management realm over 40 years. So it has been quite a long career. I actually started my career in finance, even though I was technical in nature, and went finance. They kept throwing IT under my purview as well because I was technical. So I ended up running both way back in the days when it was called information services. And it was a back office, run finance, run logistics, that kind of stuff. I think really the genesis of the strategy execution thinking that really cemented it for me was back when I was at Clarent Corporation in the late 90s, early 2000s. And this was a startup that was on a rocket ride. It just went from, I think I was employee number 89 when I started there, and 3 years later we had 1,100 employees. Went from pre-revenue to $250 million a year in revenue. It just took off. And when you're riding a rocket like that and building out all new IT structure, both the infrastructure, the applications, systems, the enterprise app integrations, all of that, you have to take a strategic look. You can't do it all at once. You can't take all the requests that are coming in for IT services in at once. You have to find a way to do the things that matter to keep the company running along the strategic track it's going through that high-powered growth. And that's where I really had to struggle with I know what the corporate strategy is and what we're trying to accomplish. How do I get that executing all the way down to the ground level of even like the help desk folks? And the people putting in the telecom and the offices that were popping up all over the world. And how do I link all these offices together? And that was really the genesis of serious strategy to execution thinking. Before, when I had been involved in finance and sure, plenty of participation in strategy, thinking about how that plays off in financial, not just operations, but planning and things like that. So that really cemented in me, I need to go from strategy all the way down to the ground floor. And after that experience, I did some consulting for a while, ran the IT PMO at PeopleSoft, which was also we're now talking a Fortune 500 company. And how do we take the strategy of the corporation and translate it down into what we're doing in a very large IT department, again, worldwide. I should say it was back at Clarent that I first ran across the concept of a project management office to try to stitch those together. And I started one of those up. And so I started taking it as my mission after that to make this link work, to go from strategy to execution, to put PMOs or whatever organizational pieces, process pieces, operational pieces were needed to make this work. While at the same time recognizing that it's not all just strategy being executed. If you say implement a system, put in SAP somewhere. Oh, goodness.
My attack by far.
Landing on my nose and my eye now. If you put in a new piece, like say implement SAP, or implement PeopleSoft in your organization. Now you got to run it. It's not going away, and you have maintenance needs and people that need support and all that kind of stuff. So you have to allocate some of the budget to, Gartner used to call it run, grow, transform. Your run bucket keeps growing every time you implement another strategic piece out of the transform or the grow. So really linking all that together became really important to me and a large part of my career, no matter where I was. You know, as a consultant, I was helping. As a consultant, I was helping other companies do this. And then then when I got to the vendor side and started working for project portfolio management software vendors, on the vendor side, then it was a matter of putting products together that help companies do that. Again, consulting with, my professional services department, consulting with companies on how to do that. So as a vendor with professional services, it was again all about helping customers make this link. To me, the project management organization really was portfolio and project management was the key to making that link from strategy to execution. There used to be a definition of projects, not the old PMI definition, of it having a goal and a start and an end and that kind of stuff, but a much broader one that said projects are how we implement change in an organization. And that's really true. You might have a strategic direction and strategic objectives. How are you going to implement those strategic objectives? You're going to make changes to your organization, whether that's systems, org charts, people, organizational change management, all those things. You have to implement the change into the organization. And really that's what projects were about. How do you implement that change? So that's why the PMO, the portfolio part of it, of course, because you can't do everything at once. You have to strategize when to do each thing, what things to do, what things not to do, right? So the PMO became a really key link, and it went from being a link in IT departments, where I came out of, to full enterprise PMOs because it was so effective. And these days we've got newer models that are more agile based, with ongoing cross-functional teams instead of teams that start and stop with each project. So I think I've gone on a bit on that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You mentioned, obviously the project side and that being critical, but I think when similar when I grew up working with PMOs, supporting PMOs, building software that was critical to project and portfolio management, right? Just focus more on the discretionary activity and spend. But when you're looking at strategy execution, maybe we'll talk about what strategy execution means to us, right? It's not just optimizing, aligning the discretionary activity and spends of the projects. It's ensuring all moving parts of the business come together, and are optimized to be able to deliver on that strategy. So when I think about strategy execution now, that's to me what it's all about. It's about how you optimize all activity and spend, operational as well as discretionary, right? And that's where I feel like the challenges comes in a little bit, right? Because now you're touching on many different processes and functions that are responsible for that, all of which have their own processes, sometimes tooling, right, in support of that. And really, it's about how do you build a cohesive operating model that brings the best of those processes together, so you have a direct line of sight from a strategy all the way through all execution. What are your experiences there in terms of getting the different functions, whether that's finance, obviously IT, but also we're seeing a lot of talk nowadays of strategy execution around business architecture being so important as you look to optimize the operating fabric of your business, and obviously enterprise architecture supporting the automating those business process value streams capabilities.
I think the organizational part that you just mentioned is fascinating, right? Because how do you organize the company? Do you put it in silos like finance and IT and product and marketing and all the typical stuff. Because when you're implementing changes, when you're trying to execute strategy, you need cross-functional pieces of that to work together. And so the idea of cross-functional teams always appealed to me. And now the idea of ongoing cross-functional teams, where you borrow from each of those functions to go after a particular strategic objective, makes a lot of sense. Rather than just sticking to the strict hierarchy, having something cross-functional to get things done. And do you get rid of some of the hierarchy and go more cross-functional in the organization? That organizational development aspect becomes pretty key in making it happen. I've seen that go its furthest in some of the newer SAFe, scaled agile framework stuff that's done at the enterprise level as opposed to just the technology level, where you have cross-functional teams with team leaders that are funded and ongoing, that each go after a different market, a different strategic objective, a different growth area. And they have a marketer, a product manager, a communications person, an OCM person, right? They have all these different specialties in them to be geared at a particular strategic objective. I found that to be particularly successful, and the interesting thing about that, you don't have to take the SAFe model to do it. Scaled Agile framework, when you look at the charts on it, looks very complex. To me, the concepts are really very simple. Organize around strategic objectives, organize into cross-functional teams to get those things done, all the way down to the ground level, and then package those into timeframes. Is it quarterly? Is it every 6 months, right? So that you can reevaluate and keep moving, rather than thinking you have to set a goal and it's a 3-year goal or a 2-year goal, and you're going to march down some rigid path all the way to that goal. Things change in business all the time, and you have to be able to adjust. So the idea of let's set a goal, let's set an objective, let's set a cross-functional team against that objective, let's make sure they're reviewing their work every so often. That's a pretty simple one that got embedded into the idea of the SAFe thing. So I find that to be particularly effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I started working for the original UMT company that built one of the first portfolio management softwares back in 2002 timeframe, before Gartner smashed together the worlds of project management and resource management and portfolio management, which are two separate distinct things, to create the mainstay project and portfolio management space. To me, it was almost like when they created that new discipline, the people responsible for managing the project tasks, or the bottom-up project management people, PMI-centric people, whatever you want to call these people, they took over, right? And for at least from 2004 till later, 6-7 years later, it seemed that portfolio management was kind of deferred, right? Everyone felt like they had to get their timesheets in order before they could work their way up to structured portfolio management. From my perspective, where I really started in portfolio management, a lot of that kind of iterative thinking was already there well before Agile was being talked about. I felt a little bit with Agile, the same thing happened, right? When we talked about the Agile transformation, often again, it started bottom up, right? It started with teams being given a different way of working. And it wasn't, SAFe didn't really sort of build steam until they had a portfolio management problem again, right? They have all these different teams working on different things, and they needed to get some, order to the chaos, right? I remember working for an organization where they had one of the largest install bases of Microsoft Azure DevOps, and they had hundreds of different teams working and no structure from a portfolio point of view, right? And so it was portfolio management got deferred, and I think later versions of SAFe came along to put that structure back in place, right? But to me, portfolio management, even from in the early 2000s, was about having a level of agility in terms of when you revisit your portfolio, regardless of execution style. And I think today,
Yep.
I still think that is not fully understood, because I feel like, and Gartner did an about face in 2019 and separated the two P's, project and portfolio management, bifurcated them, and it was strategic portfolio management and adaptive project management and reporting. One of the reasons they gave was because an enterprise, a complex enterprise, a large enterprise, is probably going to have different teams working in different ways. So you need a portfolio management capability that can harmonize or straddle different working styles versus a one size fits all approach.
I remember on that, Forrester did something that I thought was really great, which is the above the line, below the line, where they had a circular thing going on the portfolio management, then below the line was execution, with the program and project management feeding off of the portfolio management that was going on. I never understood having project management and resource management as different disciplines. And I think that's because I started from an enterprise mindset, from an executive mindset, looking at it. And if I looked at my resources that were deployed over my projects as well as my operational stuff, even when you do project budgets, that's a fallout from the corporate budget, right? Okay, we've got this much to spend on capital, this much is going into operations. How do we divide up the capital spend amongst our strategic objectives? Why wouldn't you do the same thing with your resources? Your resources are valuable and you're paying them. So how are you going to divide up your resources between your projects, your operations, which projects, all that kind of stuff? How do you even get to deciding which projects to do if you don't have an understanding of what resource capacity you have to do them? And I saw companies doing this in the early 2000s, right? Oh, let's do this list of 20 projects. And I looked at one of them and said, okay, why 20? Why not 50 of the 100 you have in? Why not 10? Is it a budget constraint? Well, it's partly that, but so and so in charge of infrastructure here says he doesn't have the resources to do this. I said, right. So instead of saying we can only do 20 out of the 100, why don't we evaluate it from a resource perspective and decide how many we can really take on based on our actual capacity? And that became standard PPM type stuff, but I never really understood why they were separate.
So you mentioned the enterprise PMO, something I'm reterming the strategy execution office, although the transformation office, where there's many names for it. I mean, I still don't see that many of them out there, right? And often when they are, they're elevated. Let's say the IT portfolio, and you elevate it, or IT PMO, and you elevate it to the enterprise because it's the most structured PMO in the organization. But no, the leopard doesn't necessarily change its spot, so it brings the same kind of thinking up there, which is as much project management thinking as is portfolio management thinking. Why do you think that every organization isn't investing in that enterprise function to be able to, improve the strategy execution capability across the entire organization?
It goes back to resources. There's actually a transition problem going from IT to the broader enterprise. If you look at the IT PMO, I've got my IT department, I've got my 500,000, however many people I have in a large IT department for a Fortune 500 company. The CIO, I am in control of all those resources. And when I divide up what resources are going to work on which things, I am in control of that. Now raise that to the enterprise level and say, now we're looking at enterprise-wide initiatives. Well, marketing is going to say, I don't have that many resources to devote to this. I'm sorry. I've got these other efforts I have to do. Finance might say, I don't have that either if you're implementing this or that. So you end up with a cross-functional resource problem. No longer am I looking at resources I control from a PMO perspective. I'm looking at resources that have to come off their day jobs to help with these efforts that may be valuable in their day jobs or replacing those people in their day jobs as they come off to do this effort. So it's a very different animal when you get to the enterprise level than it is when you're at the IT level. This is where I think the cross-functional teams have helped a lot recently. You can now elevate it to a more enterprise portfolio planning area, talking about having cross-functional teams with organizations understanding they have to contribute to those cross-functional teams that are dedicated. So I think that's a real leap forward when it comes to being able to do that. But I think the difficulty, and I've seen it many times, going from IT to enterprise was really a resource problem because you don't have control of the resources.
That makes sense. So when maybe when you're working for different strategy execution or PPM software organizations, what are the main challenges you saw organizations in implementing project and program and broader portfolio management capabilities?
That was always interesting to me as a software vendor because when I saw companies struggling with this, they loved blaming the software, and it was rarely the software. I loved it when a potential customer would come in, they'd say, "We've tried these 3 different other softwares that are competitors of yours, and they haven't worked. So we're hoping yours works." And I'm like, "Oh God, this is going to fail." And it was because they didn't understand how to actually make portfolio management work. They were looking at it. They were looking at the portfolio management practice too much as a project management on steroids, the bottom up. Let's take the projects, let's list the projects, and it's really all about project execution. And the first thing we're going to fix is how we execute projects. Take on, whatever methodology you want, a waterfall methodology, agile teams at development. I don't care. They always thought it was all about execution, and if we could just execute properly, we would get the work done. Instead of understanding that the portfolio management part is a business exercise of allocating scarce resources, be those dollars or people, against what actually needs to be done, so that when you get down to the execution level, you have the resources available to actually execute. If you view it from a purely project execution standpoint, you take on too much work, that work conflicts with itself, and the organization ends up spinning its wheels and getting none of it done well. So unless you take a top-down business view of what you're trying to get done and allocate accordingly, your projects most likely fail, and it has nothing to do with execution. And that was the biggest problem I saw talking to customers trying to implement PPM. They kept promoting project managers specifically to be heads of PMOs, and the project managers were all about execution. It's a business mindset more than a project management mindset.
Yeah, and that aligns with what I said earlier, right? Where the 2 Ps got smashed together for PPM. I think the people with the business mindset went somewhere else, strategic planning, finance, wherever they went, right? And we were left with, the all-important but tactical execution-orientated folks that, as I said, started with saying, look, until we have our timesheet squared away, we can't move up the hierarchy to get to...
Right. Yeah, that was a good timesheet.
Right? So from my experience as well, often it's easy to blame the tool, but often the processes themselves aren't well thought out, or they're, the tool is worked in, or the process is worked into those tools, and the tool is, just marred by those suboptimal processes. And a lot of the time I feel like organizations don't have the data that they need in the tool to make decisions as well.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. And I have seen that before. You talk about timesheets, there is some point to having the timesheet data, because then you have data on what your resources are working on, and then you can think about how you want to shift those resources. It's not a project execution piece. It's like your budget, right? How many dollars do I have to work with? How many hours do I have to work with across the organization? So the data is critical. Knowing all the projects or initiatives or efforts you have, right? I mean, that's kind of 101 portfolio management. First, list all the projects. And I've seen that with several companies where you list them all and you end up with projects you didn't know were going on, rogue projects, duplicate projects, things like that. That's just kind of the basics of it. But it is the start of, I'm thinking about portfolios instead of thinking about individual projects and their execution.
Yeah, absolutely. And another the problem that I've kind of seen is I think is the executive buy-in to the fact that there is an issue, right, at the C-suite level down, that we need to improve our overall strategy execution capabilities. And then, as I say, investing in that enterprise function, whether you call that an enterprise PMO or something different, that's going to improve those internal capabilities. And again, I think the fear is, again, when those enterprise functions are created, they're created with strong project focus, project execution people leading. And I think the problem has just got exponentially bigger, right? Because we talked about maybe PPM struggling because execution orientated people picked up the reins, and the sort of business mindset of the portfolio people went somewhere else. But when you get to that enterprise level, and when I think about strategy execution, I see it almost as the nexus between different functions and different processes, as I said. So, strategic portfolio management, business architecture, enterprise architecture, project execution, and change management. And often you see these different sort of functions saying, look, my change management thing is the most important, or we need to focus on business architecture, and execution will occur there. So I think the problem's got exponentially bigger because all these different domains are complex, right? Mm-hmm. And you need now finance mindset, strategy mindset, operational and business architectural mindset, change mindset, program controls, before you even get down to whichever execution methodology you're going to use. So that enterprise function, I think, is if it sets off on the wrong direction, right, in terms of being led by execution orientated people that want to establish the project management controls across the organization, we're going to end up in a bad place, because I feel like you've got to bring this new enterprise function has to support support the creation of a personalized operating model that fits your particular organization and supports or has knowledge around all these different important process areas.
A couple of examples come to mind. The first one is one that worked well. The enterprise PMO is helping a company stand up. And we started, of course, with the enterprise PMO steering committee. And they put a director or VP level person from each organization, marketing, IT, production, all of that, in that steering committee. So now we had people there that were capable of making decisions that we could work with as we were designing the processes, designing the method, designing the portfolio scoring, the portfolio strategies, right? We had all the people in the room with each of those that could make it go. That's executive buy-in. The other case I think of is when it wasn't enterprise PMO, it was still IT PMO, but the missing link from strategy to execution was the company didn't really have a strategy. And the CEO would come on in an all-hands meeting and say, here's our strategy. And I listened to it once. I won't name the company. Said, we're going to sell more of this product line and less of this product line, and we're going to spend less here and spend less there. And he had this whole detailed chart, and I looked at it and thought it through. And I was a consultant to the CIO at this company. It was a former Fortune 500 company. And I said, so his strategy is sell more and spend less? That's strategy? How do you do something with that? So the missing link was right at the top. And then getting that CEO to devote any executive attention to the IT PMO that we were putting together was worthless.
I think that is one of the biggest problems to solve for today, right? It's an organization goes out, does their McKinsey level strategic planning, gets a well thought out direction, but how does that get communicated across the organization, providing all levels down to the frontline workers with that North Star in terms of what they need to do. It's I actually just published an article on LinkedIn today around one of the key principles. There's 10 principles in my mind to mastering strategy execution, and the first one is define clear strategic direction, right? And be able to articulate the strategy across all levels in the organization, and of course the whatever you want to call them, KPIs, metrics, measures that you're going to use. I think to me that's on the executive team, right? We talked about two bookends of strategy execution. One is starts with clearly defining strategy and metrics, and the other is tracking the value on the back end, right? And I do think that's probably the biggest problem that I see today, and why everyone's talking about this gap between strategy and execution, and hence why I
And
created
it actually
strategy
starts higher
accelerator.
than strategy, right? What's your vision for the company?
Mhm.
What's its mission? What's this company about? Oh, we want to make money. Fine. We all want to make money. Why are you in business? Because if you're in business for a vision and a mission, your customers will buy into it. Then they will buy more. But let's start at the top and make sure we've got that set. Because if you don't, then when it comes to strategy and execution, the execution has nothing to hook into. And you're just
Yeah,
setting priorities on a quarterly basis or whatever and hoping you get somewhere.
excellent. So I guess looking to the future, doesn't matter how far out. I mean, what do you see that's next for the strategy execution discipline? How do you think it's going to evolve further?
So there's always leaders and laggards out there, right? The leading companies had started taking on enterprise PMOs and are now working more cross-functionally. They're setting their strategy. They may or may not be bringing in the McKinsey consultants to help them with the strategy, but they're doing their strategy sessions at least yearly and coming up with real strategies and setting up either the SAFE or the EPMO or however they want to structure that transition layer from strategy to execution. The laggards are the ones that are still going to be it's about projects, let's do old-fashioned projects. And there's more of those than there are leaders by a ton. So I still think this industry is in catch-up mode. I still think the bulk of companies have yet to understand the strategy to execution message and have yet to embrace that. Even the old school stuff we did 20 years ago, in the early 2000s, they haven't caught on to. Companies take a long time to change, especially big ones that have been around for 100 years. The inertia there, the institutional inertia there is stopping them from moving. So there's a lot of growth to go there. On the leading edge, as I was retiring, AI was becoming a big thing. Where's that going to take us? Right now, it can help augment a lot of the execution stuff. It can help with our research as we're doing planning, even as we're doing strategic planning. Who else out there is doing this competitively? What does this market look like? I can augment my research a lot. So I think that will accelerate the planning, especially for leading edge companies. I'm sure the consultancies are getting involved in that, and they should. So I'm real curious where it goes with AI. I see AI right now more as an accelerant than anything that could ever take over strategic thinking, because there's a creative process when it comes to strategic thinking, and that's going to stay a human endeavor, the strategic process. AI is not good at creativity. It's good at regurgitating what it can find out on the internet, but it's not good at coming up with new stuff. And that's how companies move forward, is by coming up with new stuff. So I don't think it'll ever do anything more than augment the strategic layer. I think it can do a lot on the execution layer, and I think it can augment with research and the like on the strategic layer. But I'm interested really to see where that goes, because that's developing so fast. I don't
Yeah,
know what you've seen on that.
a lot. Obviously, I mean, I think but no one has been able to give me a clear answer in terms of exactly how it's going to help, other than it's going to have an impact, right? It's going to have an impact. It's going to be transformational, but still waiting to see those exact use cases as it pertains to the different aspects of strategy execution, which is broad and wide, right? We're talking about, as we talked about, encompassing everything in terms of operational activity and spend and discretionary activity and spend, right?
So early 80s, and personal computers are really just starting to come out and get a little more popular. And someone asked the question, well, what do you do with a personal computer? Well, you can do anything you want with it. No, but what's it built for? What's it going to actually impact? Well, whatever you want. Nobody knew. Now we know. Same thing happened with the internet, right? Back in the 90s. Well, this is cool. I can kind of see around all these web pages, a bunch of brochures that are now online that I can see. But what's it really good for? Well, look at what it's done with the application environments on there. We live on the internet now, right? We're at that early stage of AI. Well, what's it good for? We really don't know. We're in that experimentation phase in technology where everyone's trying everything and throwing it all against the wall to see what works. And in a few years, we'll know.
Absolutely. But I do also take your earlier point that organizations have a lot to do just involving their processes today. Strategy execution is a capability that they need to develop with or without AI. Obviously, it's going to be with, but the process improvements, for most organizations, it's going to be net new and a great opportunity just to develop that muscle. So, David, I really want to thank you for your time today. It was great chatting, and I hope you're able to get that fly.
I'm sorry about that.
No worries. No worries. All right, Dave, thank you very much.
He was there for entertainment value, you know.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Ben.